Welcome to Moonlit Inc. BL. A BL story written under moonlight. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Calibrated Ghost. The air in the subterranean shooting range was thick with the smell of cordite and the rhythmic, mechanical clack-slide of a high-performance handgun being cycled. Victor Heartwell stood perfectly still, his feet shoulder-width apart, his swimmer's build silhouetted against the harsh fluorescent lights. To any observer, he was the picture of alpha discipline, lean, lethal, and utterly composed. He exhaled a long, steady breath, squeezed the trigger, and watched the center of the target disintegrate. 10 for 10. Again, a deep, gravelly voice echoed from the observation booth. Victor didn't look up. He didn't have to. He knew Elijah Patrick's was leaning against the glass, arms crossed over a chest that was easily 4 inches broader than Victor's. Elijah's scent, a heavy, grounding sandalwood, filtered through the vents, tugging at the back of Victor's throat. It was a scent that usually meant safety, but today, it felt like a challenge. "I don't need the practice, Elijah," Victor said, his voice clipped and clinical. He dropped the empty magazine and reached for his gear bag. "The director thinks you're getting twitchy. Vic says you've been spending too much time in the med bay," Elijah replied, his boots thudding softly as he descended the stairs into the range. He stopped just outside Victor's personal bubble, his height casting a shadow over the smaller man. "You looking for a promotion to pharmacist, or is there something you're not telling your partner?" Victor's heart gave a traitorous skip. He turned away, pretending to inspect his sidearm. "It's a persistent shoulder strain. The dampness in the London safe house didn't help." "Right. The shoulder." Elijah didn't sound convinced. He stepped closer, and for a moment, the sandalwood intensified, warm and predatory. Victor felt the familiar, terrifying prickle of heat behind his ears. Not now. It had been 6 hours since his last dose, and the high-grade suppressants were already beginning to lose their war against his biology. To the world, Victor Heartwell was a recessive alpha, someone whose scent was naturally faint and non-threatening. It was the perfect cover for a spy. In reality, he was an omega of the highest caliber, his natural jasmine scent so potent it could derail a mission if a single drop of sweat went unmasked. "I'm fine," Victor snapped, grabbing his bag and heading for the locker rooms. Once inside the privacy of a stall, Victor's composure shattered. He fumbled with the hidden lining of his kit, pulling out a sleek, unmarked injector. His hands were shaking, a telltale sign of omega tremors, and he hissed as he pressed the device against his thigh. The cold sting of the chemical cocktail surged through his veins. Slowly, the world stopped tilting. The phantom heat receded, replaced by the familiar, synthetic numbness that had been his constant companion for a decade. He leaned his forehead against the cold metal door, counting his heartbeats until they leveled out. He checked his reflection in the mirror. His eyes were clear, his skin pale. He looked like the ghost again. When he emerged, Elijah was waiting by the exit, leaning against the wall with a mission folder in hand. The alpha's eyes raked over Victor, lingering on the slight tension in his jaw. "Briefings in 5, Elijah said, his voice dropping an octave. He reached out, his thumb brushing Victor's shoulder, the one he'd claimed was injured. "Try not to get killed out there, Heartwell. I'd hate to have to find a new partner who shoots half as well as you." Victor offered a sharp, humorless smirk. "Don't worry, Patrick's. You're not that lucky." He walked past Elijah, the scent of jasmine buried deep beneath layers of chemistry and iron will. He was a weapon, a ghost, a lie. And as long as the vials held out, he would stay that way. Chapter 2, The Gala Mirage. The transformation from the ghost to a high society aristocrat took 3 hours, 2 tailors, and a dangerously high dose of suppressants. Victor stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the agency's dressing suite, adjusting the cuffs of a midnight blue silk tuxedo. The fabric was cut narrow to emphasize his lean frame, masking the coiled muscle of a field agent beneath the elegant drape of a billionaire. He looked expensive, untouchable, and, most importantly, scentless. To any alpha at the gala, he would smell like nothing more than expensive laundry detergent and the faint, metallic tang of his suppressed biology. A heavy knock sounded on the door before it swung open. Elijah stepped in, and for a heartbeat, Victor forgot to breathe. His partner was dressed in a classic black tuxedo that seemed strained at the shoulders, his broad frame cutting an intimidating silhouette. Unlike Victor, Elijah hadn't used a drop of scent blocker. The rich, earthy warmth of sandalwood flooded the small room, hitting Victor like a physical weight. "Cleaned up nice, Heartwell," Elijah said, his voice dropping into a low, appreciative rumble. His amber eyes traveled slowly from Victor's polished shoes to the sharp line of his jaw. "You look like you belong on a yacht in Monaco, not a dirt track in Belarus." "The goal is to blend in, Patrick's, not to be complimented by the help," Victor retorted, snapping his watch into place. His pulse was thrumming, not from nerves, but from the proximity. The sandalwood was aggressive tonight, a silent claim on the air around them. "The help, huh?" Elijah grinned, stepping into Victor's space. He reached out, his large hand hovering near Victor's throat to straighten a bow tie that was already perfect. Victor went rigid. He could feel the heat radiating from Elijah's skin. Every instinct in his Omega soul screamed to lean into that warmth, to tilt his head and expose his neck. Instead, he slapped Elijah's hand away. "Don't touch the merchandise. You'll wrinkle the silk." Elijah's grin faded, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "You're wound tight today, Vic. Even for you. You sure that shoulder strain isn't a fever?" "I'm perfectly fine. Let's go. The target is expected at 2100 hours." The gala was a sea of shimmering silk, clinking crystal, and the suffocating hum of 1,000 private conversations. The air was a battlefield of competing pheromones, expensive alphas marking their territory and omegas preening for attention. For Victor, it was a sensory nightmare. "Stay close," Elijah murmured, his hand settling firmly on the small of Victor's back. The contact sent a jolt of electricity up Victor's spine. Through the thin fabric of his shirt, Elijah's palm felt like a brand. It was a tactical move, partners acting as a couple to avoid suspicion, but to Victor's suppressed system, it felt like a provocation. "We need to move toward the north balcony," Victor whispered, leaning his head toward Elijah's shoulder to maintain the facade. "The arms dealer, Mikhailov, usually smokes there before the auction begins." "Wait," Elijah said, his grip tightening. "The band is starting. If we rush to the balcony now, we'll stand out. We need to blend." Before Victor could protest, Elijah steered him onto the ballroom floor. One hand slid to Victor's waist, the other took his hand, fingers interlocking. It was a waltz, slow and intimate. "What are you doing?" Victor hissed, his face inches from Elijah's chest. "Blending," Elijah whispered back. He pulled Victor closer, forcing their chests to brush. In the heat of the dance, Victor felt a terrifying sensation. A drop of sweat rolled down his neck, and for a split second, a tiny, microscopic fracture appeared in his mental armor. A hint of something sweet, like a crushed jasmine petal, threatened to leak out. Victor gasped, his knees momentarily weakening. "Vic?" Elijah's voice was sharp with sudden concern. He held Victor upright, his scent flared in a protective burst that nearly brought Victor to his tears. "You're pale. You're shaking." "The lights," Victor lied, his voice trembling. "Just, give me a second. I need air." He broke away from Elijah's hold, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The suppressants were failing. He could feel it, a slow, rhythmic throb at the base of his spine. The mission hadn't even reached the breach, and his body was already beginning to betray him. "I'm going to the balcony," Victor said, not looking back. "Follow in 2 minutes. Do your job, Elijah." He vanished into the crowd, leaving Elijah standing alone on the dance floor, the alpha's nostrils flared as he caught a fleeting, haunting scent that shouldn't have been there. Chapter 3, The Breach. The north balcony was a cold, marble slab suspended over a manicured garden, a sharp contrast to the suffocating warmth of the ballroom. Victor gripped the railing, his knuckles white. The night air should have helped, but the artificial chill of the suppressants was being scorched away by a rising, internal fever. Deep breaths, Heartwell. You're glitching, he whispered to himself, his voice a ragged shadow of its usual clinical tone. He tapped his earpiece. Status, Patrick's. In position at the secondary staircase, Elijah's voice crackled, low and steady. Mikhailov just exited the VIP lounge. He's heading your way with 4 heavies. You ready? Victor closed his eyes, forcing his heart rate down through sheer willpower. Ready. He didn't feel ready. He felt like a glass vase vibrating at a frequency just high enough to shatter. But when Mikhailov stepped onto the balcony, a barrel-chested alpha radiating a scent of sour tobacco and cheap power, Victor's training took over. The ghost returned, cold and lethal. Mikhailov, Victor said, turning with a predatory grace. I believe you have something that belongs to the ministry. The arms dealer sneered, gesturing to his guards. A pretty little alpha like you shouldn't be out past his bedtime. Kill him. Quietly. The first guard lunged. Victor didn't draw his weapon yet, he moved like water, stepping inside the man's reach and driving a palm into his chin. The crack of bone was muffled by the distant swell of the orchestra. He spun, sweeping the legs of the second guard and catching the third in a precise throat strike. But as he moved, the heat flared again. It was a rhythmic throb, timed to the pulse of his blood. Every exertion pushed the jasmine closer to the surface. Victor, move. Northeast corner. Elijah's voice roared in his ear. A muzzle flash lit up the darkness. Mikhailov wasn't waiting for his guards, he'd pulled a suppressed submachine gun from beneath his coat. Victor dove behind a stone planter, the marble chipping away under a hail of 9mm rounds. I'm pinned. Victor shouted, drawing his own suppressed pistol. He fired 2 shots, dropping one of the recovering guards, but his vision blurred for a terrifying second. The world smelt too much, the gunpowder, the damp earth of the garden, and most distractingly, the sudden, violent surge of Elijah's sandalwood as his partner breached the balcony doors. Get down! Elijah screamed. The balcony exploded into chaos. Elijah was a whirlwind of tactical violence, his larger frame absorbing the shock of the engagement as he moved to flank Mikhailov. He fired with terrifying accuracy, his scent flaring in a dominant, protective wave that crashed over the balcony. To any other alpha, Elijah's scent was a warning to back off. To Victor, in his destabilizing state, it was like oxygen to a drowning man. Mikhailov is heading for the jump point. Victor yelled, trying to stand. His legs felt heavy, his skin hypersensitive where his clothes rubbed against him. I've got him. Secure the drive. Elijah shouted back. Victor lunged for the briefcase Mikhailov had dropped, but a stray bullet clipped a gas heater on the wall. The resulting hiss of escaping vapor and the flash of heat sent a shockwave through Victor's system. His body, already pushed to the brink by the combat and the failing chemicals, finally buckled. He grabbed the briefcase, but his hand was slick with sweat. Not the sweat of a fighter, but the slick, pheromone-heavy moisture of an omega entering a distress heat. Elijah. Victor's voice was barely a whimper. He managed to slide into the shadows of the garden stairs just as the mansion's alarms began to wail. The tactical precision was gone. The ghost was fading, replaced by a man who could suddenly feel every nerve ending in his body screaming for a scent that wasn't his own. Victor. Report. I've lost sight of you. Elijah's voice was frantic now, the professional mask slipping. Victor huddled in the dark, clutching his side. The first wave of genuine jasmine broke through the chemical seal, sweet, cloying, and utterly unmistakable. I'm at the extraction point, Victor lied, his voice trembling. Hurry. Please. Chapter 4, Biological Betrayal. The extraction point was a narrow alleyway choked with shadows and the low hum of a cooling vent. Victor slumped against the brick wall, his chest heaving. The cool night air felt like sandpaper against his skin, which had become feverishly hot. The synthetic barrier in his blood wasn't just leaking, it had collapsed. Victor. Status. Elijah's voice exploded through the comms, followed by the heavy thud of boots hitting the pavement. Victor tried to reach for his earpiece, but his fingers felt like lead. A tremor started in his knees and rolled upward, a deep, rhythmic shaking that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with chemistry. The briefcase clattered to the ground. "Here," Victor gasped, though it was barely a whisper. Elijah rounded the corner, gun raised, scanning for threats. He looked like a god of war, his tuxedo jacket discarded, his white shirt stained with oil and gunpowder. He pivoted toward Victor, his movements sharp and tactical. "Target neutralized. We have the drive, but we've got backup incoming from the..." Elijah stopped mid-sentence. He froze, his head tilting back slightly as his nostrils flared. The air in the alley had changed. The smell of trash and rain had been wiped away, replaced by a scent so pure and intoxicating it felt like a physical blow. It was jasmine, heavy, blooming, and drenched in the phenomenal distress of an omega in heat. "Victor." Elijah's voice was different now. The professional edge had vanished, replaced by a raw, guttural confusion. He lowered his weapon, his eyes searching the darkness where Victor huddled. Stay back," Victor wheezed. He tried to pull his jacket tighter around himself, trying to contain the scent glands at his neck that were now pumping out a desperate, wordless plea for a mate. Elijah stepped forward, his own sandalwood scent surging in an instinctive, explosive response. "What is that? Who's here?" He reached down, grabbing Victor by the shoulder to pull him into the light of a flickering street lamp. Victor let out a soft, broken sound, half sob, half whimper, as he looked up. His blue eyes were blown wide, the pupils swallowed by black, and a fine sheen of sweat coated his pale face. The realization hit Elijah like a high-velocity round. He looked at the man he had fought beside for 5 years, the alpha marksman who was faster and colder than anyone on the force. The scent was coming from him. It was radiating from the crook of his neck, from his hair, from his very skin. "You're..." Elijah's hand trembled on Victor's shoulder. "Victor, you're an omega." "Don't," Victor choked out, his head falling back against the bricks. "The mission." "Elijah, we have to move." "You're in heat," Elijah breathed, the words sounding like a vow. His alpha biology, usually so well tethered, began to roar. The sandalwood turned dark and smoky, a territorial shroud that wanted to swallow the jasmine whole. "Right here. In the middle of a damn war zone." A shout echoed from the end of the alley. Mikhailov's remaining security team had spotted them. "There they are. Shoot." The irony would have been funny if Victor wasn't currently losing his mind. The guards raised their weapons, but they hesitated for a fraction of a second as the wave of Victor's scent hit them. It was a biological flashbang, confusing their senses and triggering a primal urge to claim rather than kill. "Close your eyes," Elijah growled. He didn't use his gun. He moved with a sudden, violent ferocity that was purely animal. He stepped in front of Victor, shielding him with his massive frame. Every strike Elijah landed was fueled by a new, terrifying protective instinct. He wasn't just a spy anymore, he was an alpha defending his nest. When the last guard was down, Elijah turned back to Victor. He was breathing hard, his eyes glowing with a predatory amber light. He scooped the briefcase up with one hand and hooked his other arm under Victor's knees, lifting him effortlessly. "Elijah, put me down," Victor protested weakly, his face buried in Elijah's neck, his nose inadvertently pressed against the alpha's scent gland. "I can walk." "Shut up, Victor," Elijah said, his voice a low command that made Victor's stomach flip. "We're leaving. Now." As they disappeared into the shadows of the city, the scent of jasmine and sandalwood began to braid together, marking the end of the mission and the beginning of a catastrophe neither of them was prepared for. Chapter 5, The Desperate Retreat. The safe house was a skeletal apartment in a district the city had forgotten. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight piercing through boarded-up windows, and the air smelled of damp concrete and old secrets. Elijah kicked the door shut, the heavy bolt clicking into place with a finality that made Victor flinch. He didn't set Victor down gently, he slid him against the wall, his hands lingering on Victor's ribs for a second too long before he ripped himself away. "Don't move," Elijah growled, his voice vibrating with a territorial edge Victor had never heard. Victor slumped against the peeling wallpaper, his legs tangling beneath him. The forced heat, the violent chemical rebound of a decade's worth of suppressed biology, was crashing over him in agonizing waves. His skin felt like it was melting, and every breath he drew was thick with the scent of jasmine so sweet it was nauseating. The drive," Victor wheezed, his fingers clawing at the floorboards. "Elijah, check the encryption. We need to signal the extraction team." "To hell with the extraction team," Elijah roared, whirling around. He was pacing the small room like a caged animal, his sandalwood scent darkening, turning smoky and sharp. "Look at you, Victor. If I call them now, every alpha in a 5-mile radius will be at this door in 10 minutes. You're a lighthouse in a storm right now." Victor flinched. The rejection in Elijah's voice stung worse than the fever. "I have my kit. My bag. There's an emergency neutralizer." Elijah lunged for Victor's discarded gear bag, dumping its contents onto the floor. Mags, a backup piece, a burner phone, and a small, reinforced case. He snapped it open. "Empty. You used the last one at the gala," Elijah said, his breath hitching. He dropped the case, the plastic clattering hollowly. "I didn't think, the firefight, the adrenaline." Victor's voice broke. He curled into a ball, hiding his face in his knees. The shame was a physical weight. He was the ghost. He was the most decorated operative in his division. And now, he was reduced to a biological mess, his secret spilled across the floor like a broken vial. Elijah stopped pacing. The silence in the room became heavy, pressurized. The only sound was Victor's ragged, shallow breathing. 5 years, Elijah said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He walked toward Victor, his boots heavy on the floorboards. 5 years I've bled next to you. I thought you were just cold. A recessive who didn't care for the noise of the hierarchy. I respected that. I trusted that." He knelt in front of Victor, forcing the smaller man to look up. Elijah's eyes were no longer the warm amber of a partner, they were the predatory gold of an alpha pushed to the brink. "How many times did I scent mark the perimeter of our camps because I thought you were too recessive to protect yourself from rivals?" Elijah's hand reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from Victor's damp neck. "How many times did I shield you, thinking I was helping a brother, when all along you were? I was an operative." Victor snapped, a spark of his old fire returning. He glared through the haze of his heat. "I am an operative. My biology doesn't change my marksmanship, Elijah. It doesn't change the fact that I saved your life in Prague. It changes everything." Elijah's hand finally made contact, his thumb pressing firmly against the pulse point on Victor's neck. Victor gasped, his back arching involuntarily. The contact was like a lightning strike. The jasmine flared, a desperate, floral scream for attention, and Elijah's sandalwood surged to meet it, thick and suffocating. "It changes the way I smell you," Elijah whispered, his face inches from Victor's. "It changes why I can't look away from you. And right now, Victor, it's changing the fact that I'm the only thing standing between you and the rest of the world." Victor's vision blurred. The heat was winning. He reached out, his fingers curling into the fabric of Elijah's ruined shirt, pulling the alpha closer. He needed the sandalwood. He needed the grounding weight of the man he'd spent half a decade pretending not to want. "Then stay," Victor whispered, his pride finally shattering. "Elijah, please." Elijah let out a low, guttural sound, a warning and a promise all at once, as he pulled Victor into his arms, shielding the scent of jasmine with the overwhelming shadow of his own. Chapter 6, The Safe House Fever. The silence of the safe house was broken only by the ragged, synchronized breathing of two men pushed to their biological limits. Victor was shivering, though his skin was burning to the touch. The jasmine scent had reached a fever pitch, thick and heady, swirling through the cramped room until it felt like a physical weight pressing against the walls. Elijah didn't let go. He held Victor against his chest, his large hands splaying across Victor's back as if trying to physically anchor him to the earth. The sandalwood scent was no longer just a fragrance, it was a territorial shroud, dark and protective, wrapping around Victor's floral distress like a predator claiming its prize. "Look at me, Victor," Elijah commanded, his voice vibrating deep in his chest. Victor shook his head, burying his face in the crook of Elijah's neck. The contact was agonizingly perfect. "I can't. I'm compromised. The mission, the agency will." "To hell with the agency," Elijah growled. He hooked a finger under Victor's chin, forcing him to look up. Victor's eyes were glassy, his pupils dilated until the blue of his irises was just a thin, frantic ring. A single tear tracked through the grime on his cheek. 10 years, Elijah. 10 years of injections, of synthetic blockers that felt like ice in my veins. Just so I could stand on a range and not be seen as a liability. Just so I could be your partner. Elijah's expression softened, the predatory golden light in his eyes flickering with a sudden, sharp pain. "You thought I'd care? You thought I'd look at the best marksman in the service and see a liability? The world does." Victor snapped, his voice cracking. "The hierarchy does. If they knew, if they smelled this. I'm just a prize to be won. A tool to be bred. I didn't want to be a prize, Elijah. I wanted to be a ghost." The honesty of it, the raw, bleeding vulnerability, seemed to hit Elijah harder than any bullet. He leaned forward until their foreheads touched. The sandalwood and jasmine finally began to mingle, not in a fight for dominance, but in a slow, swirling dance. "You're not a ghost to me," Elijah whispered. "You never were. I spent 5 years wondering why I couldn't stop watching you. Why I felt this insane need to stand in front of every bullet meant for you. I thought I was just a damn good partner." He let out a short, self-deprecating laugh. "Turns out, my soul knew what my head was too stupid to see." Victor's breath hitched. He reached up, his trembling fingers tracing the line of Elijah's jaw, feeling the stubble and the heat of the alpha's skin. "Elijah. I'm not going to mark you like this, Victor," Elijah said, his voice straining with the effort of restraint. He could feel the biological pull, the primal roar in his blood demanding he claim the Omega in his arms. "Not while you're drowning in this fever. Not while you're out of your mind with it." "I'm not, out of my mind," Victor whispered, though his body betrayed him with a violent shudder. He pulled Elijah closer, his nose brushing against the alpha's scent gland. "I've wanted this since the first day in the London safe house. Before the drugs, before the lies. I just didn't think I was allowed to have it." Elijah groaned, a low, guttural sound that vibrated through Victor's entire frame. He shifted, pulling Victor into his lap and wrapping his arms around him, creating a fortress of muscle and sandalwood. "We stay like this," Elijah decreed. "I'll be your anchor. I'll mask you until the fever breaks. And when it does, when you can look at me and see clearly, then we talk about what happens next." Victor let out a long, shuddering breath, his forehead resting against Elijah's collarbone. For the first time in a decade, he didn't feel like a weapon or a lie. He felt seen. As the jasmine slowly began to settle into the protective embrace of the sandalwood, the ghost finally found a place to rest. Chapter 7, The Final Pursuit. The peace of the safe house was shattered not by a bang, but by the clinical, electronic chirp of a proximity sensor. Victor bolted upright in Elijah's lap, his heart hammering against his ribs. The haze of the heat hadn't fully lifted, but the adrenaline of a seasoned operative was a powerful counteragent. His skin was still flushed, his jasmine scent lingering in the air like a fading memory, but his eyes, those cold, lethal blue eyes, were sharp again. "They're here," Victor whispered, reaching instinctively for the suppressed pistol on the floor. Elijah was already on his feet, moving with a silent, predatory grace that made the floorboards barely creak. He checked the monitors of a portable surveillance kit. 3 black SUVs were idling 2 blocks away, and thermal signatures were blooming in the alley below. Mikhailov's cleanup crew, Elijah growled, his sandalwood scent flaring into a sharp, metallic spike of aggression. They must have tracked the signature of the experimental suppressants in your system. They're like bloodhounds. Victor stood, his legs slightly wobbly, but he braced himself against the wall. I'm a liability like this, Elijah. My scent, it's a beacon. They don't even need thermal, they can smell me from the street. Elijah turned, his gaze raking over Victor. He didn't look at him with pity, he looked at him like a commander looking at his finest soldier. He stepped close, grabbing Victor's tactical vest and pulling him in. Then we use it, Elijah said, his voice a low, vibrating rumble. He leaned down, his neck bared, and rubbed his scent gland firmly against Victor's collarbone. Victor gasped as the heavy, dominant sandalwood flooded his senses, physically coating the jasmine. It wasn't a mating mark, not yet, but it was a tactical masking, a claim that declared Victor was under the protection of a prime alpha. I'm going to draw them to the stairwell, Elijah commanded, checking his magazine. You take the fire escape. Get to the roof. You're the best marksman I know, Omega or not. I need you to be my eyes. Victor felt a surge of something stronger than the heat, a fierce, burning pride. Don't get pinned, Patricks. I only have 1 magazine left. Then make every shot count, Heartwell. The breach happened seconds later. The front door exploded inward in a hail of splinters. Elijah met them with a roar, his sheer physical presence and the suffocating weight of his alpha pheromones acting as a psychological barrier. He was a wall of muscle and lead, forcing the mercenaries back into the narrow corridor. Victor moved like a shadow. He slipped through the window, his fingers gripping the rusted iron of the fire escape. The transition from the warm, sandalwood-filled room to the biting night air was a shock, but he welcomed it. He climbed, his lungs burning, until he reached the gravel-strewn roof. Below, the alley was a chaos of muzzle flashes and shouting. Victor lay prone, the cold stone of the parapet pressing against his chest. He took a breath, filtering out the lingering sweetness of his own biology, focusing only on the crosshairs. He saw a mercenary aiming a launcher at the safe-house window. Crack. The man folded before the sound even registered. 2 o'clock, Elijah. Coming through the vent. Victor shouted into his comms. Copy that. Through the earpiece, Victor heard the brutal efficiency of Elijah's combat, the thud of fists, the rhythmic fire of his sidearm. But he also heard Elijah's breathing, heavy and synchronized with his own. They weren't just 2 agents anymore, they were a binary system, a pair bonded by blood and scent. Every time a mercenary tried to flank the building, Victor's rifle spoke. He was the ghost again, but this time, he wasn't haunting the world alone. He was protecting the man who had seen his greatest vulnerability and called it a strength. As the last of the thermal signatures faded to black, Victor slumped back against the roof's edge, his hands finally dropping the weapon. The jasmine was faint now, tucked safely beneath Elijah's sandalwood. The rooftop door creaked open. Elijah emerged, his shirt torn, blood dripping from a cut on his temple, but his eyes were fixed solely on Victor. He didn't say a word. He walked across the gravel, sank to his knees, and pulled Victor into a crushing, desperate embrace. We're clear, Elijah breathed into Victor's hair. We're clear, Victor. Victor closed his eyes, finally letting the last of the tension bleed out. We're compromised, Elijah. The agency, the report. Let me worry about the report, Elijah whispered, his grip tightening. Let's just get you home. Chapter 8, The New Protocol. The sterile, white-tiled corridors of agency headquarters usually felt like a sanctuary of logic and order to Victor. Today, they felt like a gauntlet. He walked with his back straight, his chin level, wearing a fresh tactical turtleneck that sat high against his throat. Beneath the fabric, his skin still hummed with the phantom heat of the previous 48 hours, but the fever had broken. He was chemically balanced again, though the ice of the suppressants felt different now, less like a shield and more like a cage. Beside him, Elijah was a silent, looming presence. He hadn't left Victor's side since they'd stepped off the extraction chopper. He didn't touch him, but his sandalwood scent was a heavy, constant pressure in the air, a silent warning to any other alpha in the building to keep their distance. They reached the director's office. Victor paused, his hand hovering over the biometric scanner. "I have my resignation in my pocket, Elijah," Victor whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the HVAC system. "A compromised ghost is a ghost that's already dead." Elijah stepped into his space, his shadow falling over Victor. He reached out, his large hand covering Victor's on the scanner. "You're not compromised, Victor. You're just calibrated. Let me handle the talking." The doors hissed open. Director Vance sat behind a mahogany desk that cost more than a safe house. He was an alpha of the old guard, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, and smelling of old paper and peppermint. He looked up from a digital tablet, his gaze flicking between the two of them. "The gala mission," Vance began, his voice dry. "The target was neutralized. The drive was recovered. But the field report, it's unusual, Agent Patrick's." Elijah stepped forward, his posture military perfect. "The enemy deployed an experimental pheromone-based incapacitant, sir. A synthetic omega distress aerosol. It was designed to trigger biological interference in alpha operatives." Victor's heart skipped. He looked at the side of Elijah's face. His partner was lying to the highest authority in the land, with a completely straight face. "It was highly effective," Elijah continued, his voice steady. "Agent Heartwell was at the epicenter of the burst. He suffered a severe systemic reaction. I had to enact Emergency Protocol 12, biological masking and isolation, to prevent total mission failure." Vance leaned back, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Victor. "A synthetic aerosol. We've heard rumors of Mikhailov experimenting with biowarfare. You're lucky Patrick's has such high scent control, Heartwell. Most alphas would have lost their heads in a cloud like that." "I am aware of my luck, sir," Victor said, his voice smooth and professional. "Given the exposure," Vance said, tapping a stylus against his desk, "I'm putting you both on a mandatory bonded pair status for the next 6 months. If your biologies are going to be this reactive to enemy tech, I want you synced. Patrick's, you're responsible for Heartwell's scent stabilization in the field. No more solo scouting for the ghost until the medics clear the residue from his system." Victor felt a jolt of electricity, not from fear, but from a sudden, dizzying sense of freedom. Bonded pair status. It was a formal recognition that would allow them to share quarters, share missions, and, most importantly, allow Elijah to mask him without question. "Understood, Director," Elijah said. They were dismissed. The doors hissed shut behind them, and the silence of the hallway returned. They walked in lockstep until they reached the rooftop observation deck, the city of London sprawling beneath them in a tapestry of grey and gold. Victor leaned against the railing, the wind ruffling his hair. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the crumpled resignation letter, and let it go. He watched as the wind caught the paper, spiraling it down into the abyss of the city streets. "A pheromone grenade?" Victor asked, a small, genuine smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That was your best play?" Elijah stepped up behind him, not quite touching, but close enough that Victor could feel the radiant heat of him. "It's technically true. You were the grenade, Victor. You blew my entire world apart." Victor turned around, leaning his back against the railing. He reached out, his fingers hooking into the belt loops of Elijah's trousers, pulling him closer. "The medics will never find residue in my system, Elijah. They'll just find the truth eventually. Then we'll deal with it then," Elijah whispered. He leaned down, his nose brushing against the sensitive skin of Victor's neck, right where the jasmine was beginning to peek through the sandalwood again. "But for now, the ghost is officially mine." Victor tilted his head back, exposing his throat, no longer a victim of his biology, but a master of it. And the hammer is mine. I think I can live with that protocol. Under the watchful eyes of the city, the jasmine and sandalwood finally settled into a permanent, perfect rhythm. The mission was over, the partnership had just begun. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the story, please like and subscribe to help the channel grow. See you in the next story.